Hi, welcome to Hawk Ridge Systems Webinar Wednesday. My name is David Brown. I'm a training engineer. I'll be conducting the presentation for today. The title of this is Red or Blue Pill. Now that's a reference to The Matrix, if you remember those movies. Blurring the lines of reality with Visualize. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about three main areas. I'm going to take a look at some photorealistic images. You can't talk about Visualize and not show some cool images. I'll just have a few of those, and we'll only talk about some of them and what's unique about them, and I'll talk about a little bit about the settings and things like that. But most of this is going to focus on the other two areas, animation, and we're going to look at an example of turntable animation. And the main part of this presentation, I want to leave the PowerPoint and open up SOLIDWORKS and take a look at a model. And then we'll open up Visualize, and look at that model, and we're going to focus on a really neat part of SolidWorks, the add-in. So you can actually create a model right there in SolidWorks and export it directly into Visualize. Okay, we'll talk about that. Once I get done with that, we're going to talk about virtual reality outputs. And we're going to discuss three main things: interactive image, panoramic, and 360 spherical images. All right, the first one, photorealistic images. It's all about the settings. And one thing I would like to encourage you to do is to, when you're working in Visualize, click on the Help menu up at the top on the drop-down and check out the tutorials. When you click on that, it's going to take you to mysolidworks.com, and there's a whole wealth of videos and things that are for free. A lot of them are. And they will give you the basics of a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about. So I'm not going to get into the details of that as we look at some images. And I'm just going to leave that up to you to explore that, and perhaps in most cases you've already done that. This presentation is going to really focus more on some more advanced topics. All right, that being said, Visualize is all about the settings. You create the model and everything in SolidWorks and get everything situated. Then you bring it into Visualize so that you can render it, and usually for marketing and things like that. Most people are going to use Visualize to create photorealistic images. There's 6 main areas that you need to take into consideration and when selecting the appropriate settings to get the desired image that you're looking for. The first part is import. You want to decide how you're going to import the model. And I have this as one of the areas because I think it's important that as you're modeling, that you keep in mind how you're going to import that into Visualize. There's several different ways. The two main ways that you use with working with SolidWorks is automatic import. What that does is that allows you to monitor the file. When you use the automatic import option, what that does is it will monitor the file, but it gives you on the model tab the same tree basically that you have in the model. And it takes a little bit more resources for that, but you have to take that into consideration when you're going to be applying surface or applying appearances and things like that. All right. The other way is the appearance method for importing. And that is the quickest way, because basically as you create appearances in the CAD model of what you want, when you import that into Visualize, it will give you just those things or those as parts in your model tree within Visualize. It's a lot faster and a lot quicker, but you have to take into consideration the appearances in the different parts, that they have the same appearances that they're going to have once you bring those into Visualize. And if you take that into consideration, how you're going to do that, how you're going to import the model, it goes really quickly once you get it into Visualize. Okay, once you're in Visualize, you have the other 5 main areas. Model manipulation. There's a model tab where you can control the transparency, visibility, and other attributes of the individual model parts. You can even set things up for animations and move them around and things like that. Explode views and whatnot can all be handled on that tab once you have it in your environment, okay? The next thing is appearances. And the way this is set up in Visualize, it's from left to right, the tabs are, and it's a workflow, okay? Just work from left to right. Appearances are the next thing that you'd apply. And then environments, cameras. I spend most of my time working between environments and cameras. Once I'm in Visualize, that's where I spend most of my time, because that's where you're going to get the settings set up for taking your picture, basically. And here's something that I want you to understand. Okay, what you're really doing here is you're taking on the role of a product photographer. That's what you're doing. Visualize is creating an environment, a virtual environment, for you to take a virtual model, a digital model, and set that up in the exact same way that a photographer would if he was going to, or he or she was going to take and photograph a product. Right? You're going to create an environment. You're going to have backdrops. You're going to have lights that you're going to have shining on there. You set up your product on the pedestal or whatever it is, and have a gray or white background, typically is what you see. And then you'll make settings of your camera. You'll choose the lens. Is it going to be a 70mm zoom lens? Am I going to use a wide angle lens or 50mm? I'll choose depth of field settings. All of that is in the cameras. And the environments in Visualize. It's the same thing. So if you're going to really be successful with Visualize, you really should have an understanding of photography, basic photography, all right? I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through some of the images. Once you have everything set up, then you select the output that you want. Is it going to be an image, a 360 turntable animation, and am I going to create an interactive image, and so forth? And we're going to look at some of that stuff in this presentation, all right? Now, a little trick that I like to do is I like to prepare my model in SOLIDWORKS with all of the decals, all of the appearances, just the way I want it. I like to do that within SOLIDWORKS. In fact, you can even import into Visualize all of those things that I just mentioned, and lights that are set up and cameras that you set up in SOLIDWORKS as well. Okay, so you have a lot of control there. All right, let's take a look at some images. All right, this image right here is the Camaro. It's the 69 Camaro. If you do what I mentioned to you and you go and check out those tutorials, this is the model that you get to play around with, and they show you the basics on. Right? As you can see, there's a decal on the side, there's a number up on the top. And what I've done with this one here is I actually created that color. That was a custom color. It's a metallic color that I was able to create. So you can manipulate appearances and change the level of metallics and all this kind of stuff. There's really a lot that you can do with it. In fact, if you look at the disc on the brake disc on that front wheel there, you can see lines, and it looks just like a worn disc brake. And you can set all of that up by manipulating the settings within the appearances. All right. Here's a product rendering of a knife, and I have it orientated like this so you can see the shadows and things like this. Typical gray background, that is a very common thing that product photographers do. Gray backgrounds or white backgrounds, and there's a reason for that. A lot of times what I like to do is I like to use the environments that are like the classic photo studio within Visualize. That has a lot of it's just like working as a photographer. In fact, I do some photography myself, so I'm familiar with that kind of thing, and I really love how Visualize is able to set that up for you. But here with this one here, you can see on the handle, it has a carbon fiber type material applied to that handle. Okay, you can get a lot of realism. You have a lot of flexibility with materials and appearances. This one here is interesting because what I did is the model is actually the drum set, and that's fully modeled in SolidWorks, brought into this environment, and I chose an environment that I could rotate the lights around, and you can rotate the environment, and basically what you're doing is you're rotating the light source or repositioning the light source around the model. And I put it so that there was a light source off to the left. And then I found this image. I think this was kind of a cool image. Looks like a fully graffitied room. It'd be kind of cool for a club. In fact, as a musician, I've played in clubs like that. And so it kind of stood out to me. So I used that, and I brought that into Visualize as a backplate. So it's just a regular old image that I found, and I brought that in, and I'm using that as my backplate or the backdrop for this. And I arranged my environment so that it appeared that the lights were coming from behind or through the window. And if you look at the floor, you can see shadows that are cast as it would. And the front and the right side of the drum set is darker, where the left side is lighter, just like it would be if it was really sitting in front of that window, and that window was in fact the light source. So you have a lot of flexibility with what you want to do, and a lot of creativity. Artistic things can come out of this. The next couple of images are of this guitar, and basically what I'm trying to show you here is the decal of the up on the neck there. The color of the guitar body is black, and the pickguard is a tortoise shell or mother of pearl type texture to it. If I go to the next picture, it's the exact same model, but it's orientated a little bit differently. And I want you to notice the light scheme on this. The environment that I chose in SolidWorks, what they are is they're an environment that have different photos. They're really 360 images that are projected on a sphere that surround the model, and that projects the light and the scene inside inside your image that you're trying to create. But what I wanted here, what I liked was I chose an environment that had a sunset and an urban scene to it, but I didn't want the picture involved, but I liked the way the lights cast onto this guitar, and I arranged the guitar so it kind of divides it down through the middle there, and it has that really cool lighting scheme on there, and you can even see reflections of the clouds streaking on the top of the guitar there. But I chose to not display the image from the environment, and I was able to choose just a standard gray background for that. Okay. Another thing you can do, here's what I did with that same model, is I turned it on its back so it was laying on the table, so to speak, within SolidWorks or within Visualize, and I added a couple pics. Those pics were actually modeled in SolidWorks, and those are textures and images that I placed on those models in SolidWorks that were able to be imported right into Visualize. The interesting thing that I want to point out with this particular image here is something referred to as depth of field. That is a camera setting, and what that does is it's this very same thing that a photographer does when they're using a lens and they want to create an effect where you have just a certain portion of the image in clear, and you want the foreground a little bit blurry and the background a little bit blurry. That is referred to as depth of field. Now, this is a mystery to a lot of people. The other thing that you work with when you're setting up the camera, which is one of the main settings, is the focal length. And typically, in general, with photography, if you choose a lens that is a 50mm lens, that gives you an image that is pretty close to what the actual human eye sees, okay? When you start getting into 35mm or 24mm or 17mm, what you're doing is you're getting a wide angle perspective, and it distorts the image. So what I've done here, the other direction actually is like a 70mm or something like that. That would give you a zoomed in effect. And that's what I chose here for this image. I chose to position my model, and I chose a 70mm zoom lens for the for the focal length. And then I set the depth of field to a value of 8. Now, if you were to take some photography classes, there's a statement amongst photographers that goes like, what f-stop setting should I use and things like that. Well, f8 and be there. In other words, choose f8 and a 50mm lens, and you can really take good photography. So that would be my tip to you, is to, when you're working with the camera settings in Visualize, start with 50mm, and if you're going to turn on depth of field, use f8 as your starting point, and then you can adjust from there which direction, if you want more or less in focus. If you look at this one here being f8, the tone knob over here on the right, and the picks and the receptacle for the cord, those are all in focus very clearly. And then as you go back towards the bridge, you can see that things start to go out of focus, and the screw way up at the front also starts to get a little bit out of focus. So all the focus is on that little small area. That's what depth of field covers. All right. All right, this next one is the last image that we're going to look at in this section, and this addresses a setting in your camera that is on the Filters tab, actually. And we'll look at that when I open up Visualize. I'll show you where these different things are. But what this does is this turns on or illustrates something called bloom, okay? And basically what I've done, if you look at the lights up at the top of these chandeliers, when I modeled that in SOLIDWORKS, I created the bulb, and that's a shell, so it's hollow. And out of the top of the candle is 2 electrodes, and then I did a helical coil with a little sweep on there to represent the tungsten element. And I made that to be a white, just a white color, okay? When I brought that into Visualize, I used that appearance and I changed it from a color to an emissive. Okay, that's the key word there, emissive. And if you want to set up lights and things like that, or have things that you've modeled and you want them to emit light, you want to make them an emissive appearance. And that's what I've done with those. And then when I turned on bloom, bloom is the halo effect that you're getting around that, the glowing of that emissive material. And that's what bloom is. So when you select bloom, you can slide and make adjustments to the slider to get the desired effect that you want. Very beautiful on what you can do with that. All right. Okay. That's the end of the photorealistic images section of this presentation. Now we're going to go into animations. And I'm just going to click on this thing, and notice that this thing is going to start animating here. And another thing to notice, this animation is embedded right into this PowerPoint, so you can do that very easily within PowerPoint. Several different types: basic 360 turntables, camera flybys, motion studies, or combinations of all those. There's a lot of things that you can animate within Visualize. Parts and assemblies, even transparencies of those, and a lot of the different settings of those can be animated, or keyframes can be added to the timeline to animate those. Appearances, camera settings, you can even animate depth of field to change as your camera position is moving, like it is here. And you can animate lights as well. Okay, so there's a lot of power that you can do just with that. All right, this particular animation was created from a motion study that I set up in SOLIDWORKS. I'm going to show you how to do that here in a little bit. The next one is a turntable animation, and I'll just go ahead and click on this. And what this is it's a 5-second animation. I set the environment up, put the materials on there, and it's 5 seconds, and basically this ornament revolves, makes one revolution in that 5-second period of time. All right, let's take a look at what I've done with this. These are the settings that I used to set this up in in Visualize. This is what I've got displayed on this slide, is the screen captures of the different output settings for this when I activated the output tools. Notice on the left-hand side of this, there's several tabs: images, animations, and this one that I've got right here that's activated is Turntable. So I basically select that, choose the movie format, choose animation. I put a check mark in that box for create movie. And I select an angle range for start and end. Now this starts at 0 degrees and goes 360 degrees, 1 revolution. All right, that's what's going on. If I only wanted it to go from 90 degrees to 180, then I could do that as well. And at the bottom here, I'm able to choose the direction clockwise. And I typically, for almost all my animations, I always choose 30 frames per second because that gives you a nice, smooth animation. Duration of this is 5 seconds, and I could change that. And basically, with this duration, what it does is it goes from 0 to 360 in 5 seconds. If I change that to 10 seconds, then the resultant animation would be just slower. Okay, that's how it would be. It would take 10 seconds to do that same single revolution. Okay? If I change this to 2.5 seconds, then it basically would make that animation twice as fast as it is now. Okay? Now, the bottom part of this output tools selection box is setting up your render settings. And this is where you have fast mode, preview mode. Actually, preview is first, then fast, and then accurate mode. And I choose accurate mode as much as possible. When you choose accurate mode, you are able to select how many passes, and I chose 2,000 passes. So what this is going to do at this point is it's going to create 30 frames per second for 5 seconds. That's 150 images that Visualize has to render at accurate mode, 2,000 passes per image. Okay, so that's going to take up a certain amount of time. You're going to create these settings. You're going to make choices on these settings based on your equipment that you have to render, how much time you want to wait for the render, and things like that, and how much accuracy and how clear do you want to make this. The higher these numbers go, the more it's going to take, the bigger machine it's going to take, but the better quality that you're going to get out of that. Because the lighting from this one is coming from the environment, you could choose fast mode for this as well. If I chose fast, then it doesn't give me the option to check the render passes or select that at that point. It just will render at fast mode based on the settings that are set up in the tools options area of your interface of Visualize. And that's what I have shown over here on the right-hand side of this slide is tools options. That's from the Windows menu drop down at the top of the interface. You choose options, and the second tab is 3D viewport. Fast rendering mode, render passes, I have set for 100. That's what I like to usually work in. When I'm working in Visualize, I'm typically going back and forth between preview mode and fast mode with just 100 render passes. And that gives me enough quality to where I know what I'm doing and it's looking the way I want to and things like that. All right? But that's how you can control. If you do this in fast mode and do an animation like this, you want to bump up the quality a little bit, you can change that here in Tools Options. All right. Okay, now we're going to get to the part where we're going to get out of this PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you some things in SolidWorks and Visualize. All right. So what we have here is this animation motion study import. Now this is really cool, and as last I checked, this isn't in those videos, in the tutorials. Okay, so this is gold right here. This is really cool. Use Make Controller in SolidWorks. I love the Make Controller in SolidWorks. It makes it so easy to set up an animation. Once you do that, you can create a new motion study and then base that on the Make Controller settings. Once you've done that, you can use the add-in in SolidWorks for Visualize to export that right directly into Visualize, and it brings that motion study right in. When it does that though, when you use the export option for that, you have, it's actually advanced export, and I'll show you that here in a second. It will use the automatic import mode, and that allows you to monitor the file. All right, so you want to be aware of that. Let's take a look at this. This is that animation that we're going to create. This is a virtual reality headset that uses a phone. And as this animation goes in, you can see that the body turns transparent, so you can see the inner workings of the focus adjustment and eye separation of the model. Okay, if you look, notice that there's, on the bottom, there are controls that also are moving. I'm going to go ahead and click that again so you can see that in case you missed that. So focus on that as the camera moves in, the body begins to become transparent. So now you can see inside and you can see some of the mechanisms, and all of that is being worked into the animation. Let's see how I did that. All right, so what I'm going to do, first I'm going to open up SOLIDWORKS, and basically I've got my headset here that I've drawn up, and it's got all the components and everything like that in there. And notice that I have all of the materials that are applied, all the decals are applied, and I get everything set up the way I like to within SOLIDWORKS. That's how I like to work. All right, when I'm doing animations and things within SOLIDWORKS, I like to organize my mates, and I'll just expand this and take a look at the mates folder here. And I have a folder called motion. When I expand that, I can see that I have these mates. Now, all these mates I have renamed, and I've placed them in the motion folder. That way, when I go into my mate controller, it's very easy to identify what my mates are. Okay, so I organize them that way. I've renamed them all so that they make sense to me. I've got the cell phone that basically matches that up with that inner component. The faceplate is an angle that goes from 0 to 90, which is opening the faceplate subassembly. And then the limit mates for the left and right, lenses for focusing, and carriage positioning for the eye separation. All right, so I'm going to close this up. At the bottom of this is my mate controller. In case you've never played with this before, I don't see that command anywhere on my assembly command manager tab up here. So I'm going to go up to the very top upper right hand corner, and in my search for commands, I'm going to type in mate, and there's mate controller right here. Okay, so that's where you can access that. Now I've already done this, I've already set this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on this and edit the feature. You can do that just like anything else. And basically this is the mate controller dialog box. The first box, the blue box, you just choose the mates that you want. So I just do that from my Windows dropdown or the Feature Manager flyout, and I just choose the mates out of that folder. Okay, very easy when you organize them in that way. You can list them, you can rearrange them, and then what you do, once you select those, it gives you a box to change all of those. Now notice how they're named. They use the names that I gave them. That's why I give them nice names so that I know exactly what they are. So renaming things in SOLIDWORKS is always a good idea. And I'm not going to get too much into mate controller and things like that, but basically you start with all of these and you just make changes to the different values, okay, and then you create all of these individual positions. So what I do is I create one position at a time, and then I arrange them in a certain order that gives me the motion or the animation. So I'm actually building the animation right in here. All right, if I come down here, I can choose calculate animation, and then it goes through and it does all of that for me. Very easy. Okay, you can even preview that while it's working, right? So you can see those things working in there. So everything works great, and I have the mate controller finished for that. Once I have that done, now what I want to do is create a motion study based on that selection. All right. If you look down at the bottom of the page, bottom of my screen, I have a motion study, and that's already defined in there. All right. I'll show you how this works. I'll go back to my Models tab, and I choose New Motion Study up at the top, Assembly Manager, right? Just click on that one button up there, come down to the commands for the motion study. It opens up a tab. Right here, the very first command, kind of in the middle, really. Animation Wizard. I click on that. Select animation type, and at the bottom of this list is Mate Controller. I click on that. Choose Next. I don't need to make any choices here. I choose Next. Make sure the start time is at 0, and then Finish. And that will take that Mate Controller and build a motion study just like that. I don't need to do that for this one, but that's all I would have to do to finish that up. Okay? And then you end up with a motion study that is based on that Mate Controller. Okay? And you can scrub through that. All right. Once I have that done, I'm going to return to my Model tab. And now that I've got that all set up and defined in here, I'm going to use the add-in in SOLIDWORKS to export this motion study into Visualize. So I'll choose the options up at the top, hit the little down button, and choose Add-ins. And from my list, I'm going to choose Visualize. Select OK. That opens up that tab, and I just have a couple different things here. Export Simple. This is the fastest experience to paint and take photos of your model. Basically, if I choose Export Simple, it just exports. It's basically going right from here into Visualize, and it uses the appearance mode. All right. I want to choose Export Advanced. This will allow me to bring in the motion study. All right, but it will also do automatic, and it will give me a little bit larger tree in my Visualize, but that's just fine. Export, Advanced, hit the down button, and choose Motion Study 1, and select OK. Now when I choose OK from here, it will automatically open up Visualize and put this into a new Visualize project. Okay, and then you can change the environments and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and open up Visualize, and this is what I have. And basically, I'm going to go ahead and on the right-hand side, I'm going to choose cameras. But before I do that, I want to just take a minute to look at a few things here. If you're looking at this, you may say, why is it all white and gray? This is one of the best enhancements that I love about the new version of Visualize, because I did not like working on a black screen. I like working on light, bright backgrounds. It makes it easier for me to read. And if you go to Tools, Options, User Interface, you have a theme, and you can choose light or dark. Love it, right? I just love that. Anyway, I'm going to cancel that and get out of that, but I just wanted to show you that real quick. The icons are a little bit easier to read now, and there's been a lot of good improvements in this. All right, but let's take a look at what we've got going on here. These are the 5 tabs over here that I mentioned earlier. You've got the Model tab. This shows me the model with all of the different items on it, or parts. Notice that some of them have red dots on them. That means that there are keyframes in the animation for those parts. All right. If I choose View up at the top, I can show timeline. Go ahead and click on that, and that gives me the timeline at the bottom here. And notice that if I scroll down here, there's a lot going on. And at the very bottom, I have animated animation. That's a camera that I've animated in here. And I have a virtual reality or VR main body animation. And what that is that's the transparency of the main body of this part. This yellow line here in the timeline, if I click and drag that, I can see or scrub the the camera, okay? Or the animation, rather. What I have going on right now is I actually have the camera, a different camera displayed. So I'm going to go ahead. These other tabs here are appearances, scenes. I'm just using a blurred studio as my lighting environment here. Cameras. I have two cameras, the default camera, which is active now, and the animated camera. All right. Notice that it has a red dot on it. If I double click on that to activate that, now I can actually see the motion of that camera as it goes through, and I can see when everything turns transparent and the bottom of, or the back side of the device, and as it's moving through its animation, okay? Exactly the way it was set up within SOLIDWORKS. Now, right now I'm using a fast render selection. If I choose preview, this is typically what I like to use when I'm working with animations. It makes it a lot easier to work with that. That red right there is actually part of the path of the camera, okay? I'll show you that here in a second. So you can scrub through that from beginning to end. This is about a 14-minute or 14-second animation, all right? If I activate the other camera, the default camera, you can see some blurry things there. That is actually the path and the orientation that the animated camera is taken. You can even see the camera there. All right, so watch what happens as I scrub. You can see how the camera moves through that animation, okay? And there's a lot of information that you can find in those tutorials on how to manipulate the camera and things like that. I'm not going to go into that much detail with that, with this lesson here, okay? The main part was exporting using the add-in to create this animation, all right? All right, I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to close these two things. I'll return to my PowerPoint. That's a basic animation using the Mate controller in SOLIDWORKS to create a motion study, and then using the add-in to import that into Visualize. All right. The next three things that we're going to look at are the virtual reality, I guess. And there's a definition there that a lot of people like to argue about. SOLIDWORKS Visualize previously last year had for your type of selections for images, you had Panoramic or VR, they called it, right? Well, they changed the name of that to interactive image because a lot of people complained, well, that's not VR, that's not virtual reality, that's something else. Well, you know, it's a loose definition, I guess, but it's kind of being more defined nowadays with these headsets and things like that, where, you know, you can create these virtual reality and basically all you're doing is creating an optical illusion and tricking your mind into this and your sensations into giving you a false sensation that you're actually in and manipulating this thing and so forth. Well, okay, that's virtual reality. But to me, I've been working with virtual reality for the last 16 years now when I've been working with SOLIDWORKS, because I'm manipulating a model in a virtual environment, and I'm just using a mouse to do it. And now, so anyway, there's a lot of debate going on there about what virtual reality is and things like that. But I think I've been working in virtual reality for a long time. All right, let's talk about these next three things. This one is one of my favorites, interactive image. It's great for product marketing. It creates images based on orbits and angles defined in the camera settings. And when it's hosted on a website, it provides customers with an interactive method for viewing the product. Okay, I'm going to click on this, and that's going to open up my web browser. And basically, this is the interactive image. So imagine this being on your website with your product, and somebody can click on it and they can spin it around and they can look at it in different angles and things like that. Those angles are specified within Visualize, okay, in my camera settings. All right. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm going from a 0 to 50-degree angle, and I'm doing that in 5 orbits. right, with 10 images per orbit. So really, if I go all the way down to all the way up, that's the 5 images. So that would be the 5 orbits. So an orbit is really spinning it around like this. So there's 5 orbits and there's 10 images in each orbit. So as I spin this around, there's 10 images that spin that all around in each of those orbits. So that's the definition of what's going on there. All right. I love that because you basically get all those images and they can just manipulate that around. These are the settings that I used to create that. All right. Interactive image settings. I chose render an image, JPEG format, and for output mode, interactive image was what they used to say VR. Now it says interactive image. All right. Okay. So that's where that's at. Once you select that, it activates this box down here where you can choose how many orbits and how many images per orbit, and then the start and end angle. All right. What this does is if I've got 5 orbits and 10 images per orbit, that's 50 images that SOLIDWORKS is going to render based on the center of my slide here has the resolution, comes from the camera, that size comes from the camera, 1920 by 1080. I almost do everything in that because I want to do 1080p as a resolution for my monitor, for my cell phone, for my widescreen TV downstairs. That's basically when you do 1920 by 1080, that is a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, right? And that's what I choose for that. That makes sure that I have good high quality images in all my presentations, videos, and things like that. All right. Then your render settings, I chose accurate mode and 2500 passes. That got me those really nice, clean, clear, crisp images of that. 50 images at 5 orbits, 10 images per orbit. How did I come up with an end angle of 50? That's this next thing here. What I'm showing here on the right-hand side is the camera in that project. Okay, this is the camera tab, as you can see. The camera tab, the default camera there. On the transform tab of this is latitude. And I put in a value of 50 just to see what it would look like, to get a preview of that. If I go any higher than that, then it starts to just, I'm looking top down. So the higher I go, you know, and so forth, the more I'm going to have to create and all that kind of stuff. So I chose 50. And I didn't want to go below the table because I have the object sitting on a table with shadows and things like that. It wouldn't make much sense to try to look at it from underneath. All right, it all depends on how you're setting it up and the desired output. But that's how I chose that, by selecting latitude and just seeing what it looked like, right? And then rendering it at these settings. All right, let's take a look at another one. Panoramic. Now, like the interactive one that we just looked at, that's great for a product, and you're taking the camera and you're positioning it all around the camera or all around the product and taking a bunch of images of that. A panoramic is taking a camera inside the middle of a model, in this case, the Woodland Hills Training Center for Hawkridge Systems. All right, I have a model of that. I put a camera in the middle of it, and I chose panoramic, and it creates 6 images based on the camera location, up, down, so all 6 images like the box of a cube, right? And then it stitches those together. Now you have to use accurate mode for this because all of the lighting inside this model, it's an interior space, all of the lighting is created from elements of the model. I'm gonna go, and I wanted 2500 passes or greater in order to create that thing. All right, once I click on that, it opens this up and I can zoom in and then I can pan around the entire thing. All right. If you look up at the lights inside my model, all I did was I made those to be white, just a white paint, right? And when I brought that into Visualize, I made those to be emissive surfaces. I did a couple test images to make sure that the amount of lighting was correct, and then I rendered it. And it really didn't take that long. Okay, it was a little bit of trial and error to get the lights to shine as much as I needed to, and that's what I did. I also put a little bit of emissiveness on the screens for these, so to make them look like they're glowing a little bit, like monitors actually would. There's a lot of great detail in here. The carpet is actually a photo of the real carpet that I took with my phone and applied it to the model in SOLIDWORKS, and the wall is actually the color. That was a color image from the website where we purchased the paint when we remodeled this room. And if you have ever been in the classroom, this is exactly what it looks like, except on that round table over there, there would be some snacks, and you'd have a wonderful instructor up in the front of the classroom greeting you as you came in. But with this panoramic, there's some controls that you can use. You can either set it so that it actually automatically plays through and it goes and it spins around the room and things like that. All right, and you can do widescreen or full screen and all of that. All right. The settings that I use for this, in the camera options, I chose perspective, just like it would with any image. Aspect ratio 16:9, just like I always do. I started with a focal length of 50 millimeters. I'll give you a hint. Almost all of my images are 50 millimeter or above, because if you go below 50 millimeter, then you start getting into wide angle and it distorts the perspective to an extreme where it doesn't look quite right. All right. So that's what you want to keep that in mind. For the output mode, for render options, I choose panoramic from the drop-down. The resolution comes in at 1920, which is based on, or I actually place it at 1920, and it automatically calculates it to be 1920 by 1080, based on the aspect ratio that's set up in the camera, which is 16:9. Then the render settings, I chose accurate and 3000 passes. When you're using accurate mode and you're relying on lights internal to the model, you need to have 2500 passes or more in order to have nice, crisp, clear images that don't have graininess to them. All right. And the last one is where we're finally going to talk about actual virtual reality stuff. Creating 360 spherical images for use with VR headsets. Now I'm going to click on this image and it's going to open up this little program that I downloaded from the internet called LizardQ. All it is it's a 360 image viewer, okay? And it behaves very similar to the panoramic, except if you notice the image, it's a spherical image, okay? But it requires special software to view this. But it's basically the same type of effect that you get when you're using a viewer, or when you're working with this. All right, this type of output. These type of images require a viewer app. Facebook 360 is able to create or to view 360 images. In fact, a lot of smartphones now, iPhones and Samsung Androids and things like that, their camera apps are able to take 360 images. And if you've seen some of these on social media and things like that, where somebody takes the trip and they're on the top of the mountain and they create this cool 360 image that you can click and pan around it, well, that's what this is. That's exactly what this is. Flickr is another website that has that. If you look on the right side of the screen, I chose View Gallery VR 360 Photo Viewer and loaded that to my Android phone. And what happens with this is you create this 360 image and it puts two of those, one on one side for your left eye, one on the right side for your right eye when you activate the app. You put that into one of these VR headsets like Google Cardboard or one of these things that you see on the screen here, the Hawk Vision 360. Or others that you can buy. You put that work with cell phones. You put that in there and you put it on and you move your head around and it looks just like you're inside that room, because it works off the gyroscopic sensors in the cell phone to move the thing around. So that's where you're getting the new current definition of VR. That's what VR or virtual reality is. Okay, that's where things are going with this. There's a couple different things that you want to take in mind when you're doing this is the stereoscopy support. There's 3 different types. Mono, same images for both eyes. Now that's what I chose when I created this image. And when I put it in my app and put it in this device and stuck it on my grandson, my 6-year-old grandson's head, he was looking all around and things like that. And he said, wow, this is awesome. So, you know, if a 6-year-old says that it's awesome, then you know it's awesome, right? Because they always tell the truth. So there we go. Stereo 2-up is added 3D effect. When you do that selection, it allows you to define eye separation and focal distance and even get it even further. Stereo anaglyph is one of those images that you've seen these before. They've had them for years. Basically kind of creates an offset image wherein it's got some red and blue tints to it. And if you put these cheap 3D glasses that have a red lens and a blue lens on it, it looks like it's a 3-dimensional image that you're looking at. All right, so that's what those are, okay? The settings that I use to create this particular one here, I want you to notice on the right-hand side of the screen is the camera tab. Notice I've got 4 cameras. The default camera, camera 1. Camera 1, actually, it's the same project that I used to create the panoramic image that we saw just a few slides ago. And then the one that's active is the 360 camera that I named 360. There's another one for camera front in there, but 360. And when I set that or selected that, that's what is being displayed. The settings are being displayed below. For type, I chose 360. On that drop down, you have the choice of orthographic, perspective, which is what I do most of my stuff with, or 360, and that will create this 360 spherical image. All right. When I do that, it activates another tab on the camera setting that's titled 360. And in the center of this slide, you can see that that's active, and that is where the stereoscopy is choices can be found. Mono is what I chose. And then for render options, the size, 2160 by 1080, that's based on the aspect ratio that's set in the camera setting. I chose accurate mode and 3000 passes to generate that 360 image. All right. That's a lot of information. We covered a lot of ground, and I hope you learned something from this webinar. We talked about photorealistic images. I gave some hints and tips and tricks to use. Visualize is amazing what you can do with it. Animations we looked at, basic turntable animation, and setting up a mate controller to export to a motion study, to use the add-in and export that out into Visualize to then create a rendered animation of a couple different things. The robot arm in the CNC work cell and that VR headset that I have modeled up there. And then we talked about the quote-unquote VR or virtual reality outputs. Interactive image, what that does for you, panoramic, and of course the 360 spherical. All right. One thing I will say about those 360 spherical images is that you can use those and you can export those as HDR. And if you've played around with Visualize at all, you'll know that the environments that you choose are HDR images. And they're projected on a sphere that's around the model. So what I'm trying to say is that you can create your own HDR environments based on using 360 spherical images as output, and then using those as environments. And that's it. Thank you for attending this webinar. Contact your sales representatives today. There's some numbers up at the top left-hand corner, phone numbers, and some our Hawkridge Systems website, and some emails that you can get more information on. There's my robot. He's playing with my guitar again. One thing I would like to mention to you that all of the images that I've used to create this webinar, this presentation, were all done in Visualize.